Hey, women of welcome. Happy to see you. I am coming on here today because I want to talk about the big, beautiful, I don't know if I want to call it beautiful. I don't think I do. I want to call it the big bill that was just passed. So I'm going to talk about this, but we're going to talk about this with someone who's entrenched in this work, who is the president and CEO of one of our founding partners. Her name is Jennie Murray. Here she skips a little bit, but she's going to be on in about 3 seconds here. For those of you who aren't aware, maybe you are. I think some of you who follow us are following this closely. Hey, Jennie.
Hey, Ree. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. So those of you who are following us closely and whatnot, you're paying attention to the advocacy we had around some of the things that were included in this big bill that President Trump signed on July 4th, which includes really historic and unprecedented numbers and for all kinds of activity in the country. And so I thought, you know what, let's just talk about what are some of the biggest implications of the bill. And I think some of us, if we're honest, we've kind of grown a bit weary of advocating and then seeing something this egregious kind of come across and actually get passed. It's just really disheartening. And Jennie Murray, again, President CEO of the National Immigration Forum, which is one of our founding partners, she's going to talk us through just a couple things here in the next just 15 minutes. So just stick around for just a minute. We're going to talk about 3 things. What are the kind of the biggest, most concerning things in the bill? What are the implications of those things in the bill? And then what can we reasonably do in our advocacy? So those 3 things, we're going to cover that just in the next 10 to 15 minutes. So stick around if you're in it with us. So Jennie, thanks for joining us and being with us.
It's always good to be with you all.
Yes, we love having
Faith,
you.
it's really fun to check in.
Okay, so what are the biggest things, the most concerning things that just got passed in this big, beautiful bill?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to scroll through some things really quickly because there's just so much, and I'm going to dial it down because I don't want us to get lost in too many details, although it's good to know what's in there, right? So we have heard a lot of things that are in the big, beautiful bill, the OBBBA. There's $145 billion for immigration included in this bill. Now, most of it is immigration enforcement and border security. A tiny bit is for the actual immigration system. So we're actually going to really talk through that very quickly in a fast way. So 145 billion. First big tranche of money is border security, and this is 70 billion. Most folks know right now the border is absolutely secure, and the current structure is working. It's in place. It actually started to diminish quite a bit under the last 4 months of the Biden administration, and then of course President Trump has definitely much more so diminished crossings at the border. And there's a lot of conversation around that, but just want to say that we're infusing $70 billion into the border at a time when that no longer looks needed. However, it will go to physical barriers, CBP facilities. This actually means these are shelters in many cases, humanitarian shelters to help receive people on the U.S. side of the border. So it's important to know CBP personnel, CBP technology. So CBP again is Customs and Border Protection. That's our personnel who are along the border and are in our ports of entry, which are ports and airports, right? So we've been advocating actually for a while that this is fine. We can have more infrastructure. We do need more personnel. In fact, I've gone with you, Bree, with Women of Welcome to the Border and prayed over agents who said, we do need more personnel. It is something that ask for prayers for. We feel stretched thin. So, there is that, although the question is that needed right now? And I would say it's $70 billion. That's not a needed infusion because we have a lot of infrastructure. The next big piece is enforcement. So what folks are seeing about folks being arrested, detained, and possibly deported on the interior of the country, we refer to that as enforcement, right? And there's 75 billion in that category. That is the most concerning category for us that we need to be monitoring, and that I would say women of faith absolutely need to think about advocating around. How will that money be used? What will the quality of the arrests be? What will the quality of detentions be? And how will folks be deported? Will they get access to rule of law and all of those things? So we'll be definitely monitoring that, and we'll loop back at the end about what people can do. I would say this is the category. The other thing is the expansion of something called 287G. That is basically the administration asking local law enforcement to participate with the federal government to help to institute immigration enforcement. Historically, these have always been separate. And, Bree and I, you and I both get to work with a number of police chiefs and sheriffs around the country who would desperately warn against this, to say involving local police in enforcement means that our communities are actually less safe, because that means immigrants are afraid to then participate in investigations and report crime. So that's something we'll be watching. So that's the enforcement category. Then there's two other categories, and then we can stop and discuss, Bree. One is this huge set of new fees. So just so folks are aware, the Office of Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS, that's the office that processes all immigrants that come into our country, regardless of the visa pathway. So they already operate a fee structure that's pretty hefty, meaning if you want to be an immigrant, you have to pay to immigrate. And there are all these new fees. The only thing I would call out especially that we're worried about, and that I think that folks here will be worried about, there's new fees being imposed on those seeking humanitarian refuge or humanitarian visas, meaning an asylum seeker at the border, maybe a mom and her child who's gone through the Darien Gap through Mexico, has had to pay people along the way, or she's had to give bribes, or she's been robbed, which is very often the case, would then at the border have to give $100 for their application fee, and then $550 to be able to work in the US. And then every year would have to renew that at $275. And so they're starting to now pay when they have, they might be fleeing one of the most vulnerable, places that people have ever been in. Also, humanitarian parole, temporary protective status, all of these folks would have fees and would be in vulnerable categories. So we're really nervous about that. And then one of the most egregious ones I would say that's in the fee category is if you are caught between ports of entry. So if you're crossing unauthorized, I guess would be the way of putting that, you will be charged a $5,000 fee. And that's even for some of the most, egregious situation where somebody is fleeing violence. So we're worried about the fee categories quite a bit.
Well,
The
let me
last,
ask you this too.
yeah,
I mean, I even saw fees for reuniting and retrieving unaccompanied minor children
yeah,
out of the care of the Office of Refugee Resettlement.
yeah.
So, talk to us a little bit about how kind of unprecedented some of those fees are.
Yeah, it's really unprecedented for vulnerable children to for their cases to have fees attached. I think that the administration likely feels that a humanitarian group would help to sponsor, but that is not something you can take. You can believe as a government will happen, right? For sure. And I think what it's meant to do is to sort of wrongly so. It's a wrong understanding of why parents might send their children or allow their children to come in an unauthorized, in a alone, an unaccompanied way.
Mhm.
It means that they're trying to say, well, don't send your children. Well, what we know is if a parent sends a child alone, they are in the most desperate setting, period. I mean, Bree, you and I are both moms. There ain't no way I'm letting my child
Yeah.
cross a border without me unless I am
Yeah.
beyond
And if I've
resources.
already paid with everything that I have, and I've also likely paid with my body in order to get my child just close enough to see the fence, let alone
Right.
approach the fence. $6,500 to have my sister sponsor a child feels like it is, I don't want to get emotional about it, but it's like so egregious because you're just placing this extra burden
That's
on
right.
families who are already making this desperate decision. But in
That's right.
light of all that you have paid, that's not a deterrent for you because you've already paid such a significant cost
That's
that
right.
you're like, somewhere along the way, we will
Yeah.
find $500 for my sister to sponsor my child. But for right now, I have zero.
Yeah.
And that's pennies compared to what I've already sacrificed and put
Yeah.
up to get my kids this far.
Yep. Yep. That's right. That's right, Bree. So there are so many things in the fee structure. It's like really extensive, and maybe we can try to provide a whole list because no way can we cover them all here. But basically, everything that's in there is new. It's in addition to the fees that we already have in the system. So it's a really difficult thing. And then I want to just put one glimmer of what I think is good in OBBA because we've been advocating it for a long time. It will add 100 new immigration judges to the system. Whether that's intended for good or bad, I will take it because the backlogs are significant and we do need more adjudication. We need to make sure nobody benefits with somebody hanging in the balance for 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 or plus years, right, in a vulnerable situation. Whether you're pro families being supported or more on the restrictionist side of things. So I'm really glad to see that. I think that, so, I mean, I can stop there, Bree. I would say one thing I want to call out is the ICE, sort of that enforcement increase. It does increase the ICE budget 308%. That is astronomical. And so what I think women can do, and I'll break here and see where you want to go next, but what I think women can do is to now advocate for how this money is spent in a way that is responsible and takes into account, vulnerable individuals.
So, I mean, there's so much in this bill, and we will put down a breakdown of those things. I think we were all just trying to wrap our heads around, the changes that were made as it was being passed back and forth through the legislature, and then finally, when it was done, everyone was like, "Well, where's the final thing? Where is it?" And then we found it, and then we're like, "Oh boy,
Yeah.
here we go." So we will have a write up for that. If you are not a part of our policy dispatch email, we send that out every other Wednesday with a breakdown of kind of the top policy passings or happenings that are going on. So make sure you go to womenofwelcome.com and sign up for our newsletter on the policy dispatch. So you can be informed of that. We don't always put everything on social, but our newsletter is a great place to find us in that. Um, what do you feel like are the biggest? I mean, you said there was some benefit in terms of immigration judges, and then some, I think I heard you correctly saying either there are some shelters or some processing centers that will be along the borderlands, which is what, we've been
Yeah.
advocating for a long time for.
Yeah.
So you advocate, like you mentioned, there are several kind of positive things. Border Patrol would be getting more personnel. What do you feel like, you mentioned kind of like local law enforcement not necessarily wanting to get involved with federal enforcements. What do you feel like is going to be the biggest tension coming out of this bill in local communities?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be the interior enforcement. So I think that how this money is used is a very big issue. So we've just got these huge lump sums, and local law enforcement cannot participate in federal enforcement, which immigration is a federal jurisdiction, unless they sign this 287G. But there will be a lot of pressure to sign that, right? There's a lot of resources that are going to be infused in communities if they sign that.
And
However,
resources withheld if you don't do that, right?
absolutely. Yeah. Your community next to you might thrive. Meanwhile, you didn't get those resources. And there's layers of then, potential pressure then to elected officials at the local level if the police chief decides not to do that. So I think one of the biggest opportunities here, one of the biggest challenges also is the other side of the coin, right, Bree, for opportunity is we can absolutely come alongside, especially our law enforcement officials, but our local elected officials as well well, mayors, governors, and these chiefs and sheriffs, to say we absolutely support you not signing the 287G. And there's a lot of reasons why, and we work with the Law Enforcement Immigration Task Force. You can go to leitf.org and see a lot of the reasons why they wouldn't support that. But one of the major reasons is like they actually just, even if you give them hiring money, they can't find officers. They haven't been able for more than a decade to, recruit officers. It's such a hard thing in our country. So throwing money at this problem might actually, not in any way really help the way that folks think it would help. So we can support them. That's a hard thing for them to say no to. So we can offer a lot of support and say, we understand why you wouldn't do that. And we, members of the community, are okay with not receiving those resources if it means that you would have to violate that community policing trust that you worked so long to establish with all people here. So that's one big thing, honestly, at every level, the most local to the federal level, that folks can weigh in on, because it is one of the most concerning things, especially hiring local jails. Authorizing 287G would mean that they would get access to local facilities to detain people. So in your own neighborhood, your jail might become an immigration detention center if the local authorities sign 287G.
Okay. So again, fighting kind of all of those feelings of hopelessness in advocacy and just hopelessness as we're watching all that is unfolding in terms of enforcement and things like alligator Alcatraz and all of these things that are just making our hearts really grieve in terms of really the championing of that kind of cruelty and the belief in that kind of fear and deterrence as part of the policy. What would you say? I mean, you're sitting as the president CEO of the National Immigration Forum. Like, you're seeing all of this and having to take it all in, and your hands are in just about every facet of immigration. What would you say is like the thing that you are most hopeful about? And what would you say about advocacy moving forward when we see things continue to just get pushed through like this?
Well, what I would say is that there's a whole lot of Republican and Democratic leaders on the Hill who are now very motivated to do something else on the other side of this. And they've been waiting. They knew that the administration was going to get some version of this bill. And so they've been trying to just negotiate it down to be the least bad version of what was circulating. And I think they have some victories, although a lot of it overwhelmingly for immigration, it's not a positive bill. But now they're ready. So they've been sort of mounting these bipartisan groups, both on the House and Senate side. There will be a lot of compromises. There's nothing anybody's talking about right now that I would call this amazing immigration, comprehensive immigration reform bill. But there are some really amazing things. There are groups of bipartisan representatives that are trying to put forward, something that would help to give a pathway to those who've been in the country at least 10 years, who have no violent crimes. That could help as many as 7 million people in our communities, our neighbors, farm workers, lots of other folks. And so that includes dreamers, those that have DACA. So there are some really positive things on the horizon. And I actually think that this bill kind of took some of the ugly stuff and just pulled it into one place and is allowing some of the most restrictionist people to say, we had a victory. This is what we have. The administration passed it. But now these moderate folks which actually 80% of the country and 80% of people on the Hill are in a much more moderate space. And I think it's going to allow for a vacuum on the other side for some reasonable, how do we help people? Can we agree on some of these big categorical things that we've been trying to get done for so long? Can we just get them through now that we have that border victory, now that we have that enforcement victory? And I say air quotes victory, right? But I think it's actually going to allow for a lot of room on the other side, Bree. So I'm super hopeful. I've been on calls all morning with members of Congress as they're trying to shape what they want to put forward. They've just been waiting for for this to move because it sucked all the air out of the room.
Well, That is encouraging to hear. I think all of us are hoping that these congressional leaders find their footing
Mhm.
in this space. And I think we're just, exhausted of seeing the lack of motivation and conviction to really do what moderates want done, right? So, what would you say is the number one thing if our community picked up the phone today and any of our ladies picked up the phone today, what would you say? Who should they call
Yeah.
and what should they be advocating for?
So two huge things. One is how this money is spent. Like, I'm an evangelical woman. I'm committed, I'm in your district, and I care about how this money is spent. And I want to make sure that, especially the interior enforcement money, is spent in a way that's humane, that prioritizes violent criminals as we were promised in the administration, and and that we don't turn our local law enforcement centers and personnel into sort of parts of this enforcement mechanism, right? So I think that's number one. And then I would say number two is, and we're right here with you and advocating for you to go and create bipartisan solutions now that can help the multitude of people who are here, who are vulnerable, who need to be protected, who are longtime contributors, right? We do know that over 71%, I've seen higher numbers, but the one that I trust and I monitor closely that tends to be more moderate, over 71% of those who have been deported already, of the 72,000 that have been deported, are non-criminal individuals with no criminal history. Their only wrong was an immigration violation. So, we need to keep them accountable on how they spend this money, and we need to motivate our members to get back out there and work for us.
Yeah. No, that's
There's
great.
a third piece, Bree, that
Yeah.
I would say that's a bit more local, and I think I saw somebody in the chat ask a little bit about this. As we think about this fee structure, it cannot be changed now. It has been put into effect. And so actually, if you do have, if you have local nonprofits that work with immigrants, or if you have a fund at your church that has supported other things in the past and no longer can you use that because maybe that was refugees and that's in a halt right now or whatever that is, I would think about creative ways to help support some of these vulnerable individuals who are now going to have these added fees that are already in the interior of the country, and this is going to be applicable for them and is going to be destabilizing. So that's a local way also, I think, that women should be thinking about how to support.
That's great. I mean, I was even talking with some local ministry leads here where I live in Colorado, and they a couple of persecuted Iranian Christians had been picked up by ICE just recently here in Colorado, one of them in the city that I live in. And so, of course, the churches where these folks were congregant members and participating, these pastors are like their worlds are being just cracked right open right now. And they're like, what can we do? And
Yeah.
it's about, the ministries I'm talking with are like, we need to provide legal support. So if people could donate to places that are providing low bono or pro bono work for immigrant neighbors
Mhm.
and helping find people where they are. I know that there are also letter writing campaigns. I can drop all this in the comments and things like that. But we just have the highest number of detention numbers right now too. So when you're talking about like local supporting and ministries, start digging around a little bit and just kind of find out what's going on in your city and what you can support locally, because I do feel like there is going to be this, and there already is this strain on local ministries who are really trying to show up well. And so an
Mhm.
influx of people who care and want to support local ministries that are doing the hard work of really trying to identify and represent and support immigrants would be really, really important. So there's three things Jennie mentioned about advocacy in the couple weeks, days, months ahead. And that is, one, you want to advocate for how this money is spent. The money is already allocated. It's out there. There's nothing we can do about it. So how is the money spent? One is that we want to try and come alongside our local law enforcement and support that. We want our law enforcement to stay local and to be local and not turn into federal enforcement. We also want to prioritize the humane treatment of those that are going to be impacted by this kind of funding and the enforcement that's going to come from this kind of funding. Next thing she talked about was advocating for bipartisan legislation for solutions, talking about bipartisan immigration reform and all kinds of solutions in terms of worker visas and guest programs and a pathway for dreamers and some of these things that we, again, have been talking about for years. And then the third thing is just looking locally about ways that you can support local ministries that support immigrants. So anything else? Jenny just dropped in the chat, leitf.org. Can you tell people, remind them what that
Yeah.
is again?
That's the Law Enforcement Immigration Task Force. It's 160 police chiefs and sheriffs across the country. They're working really hard to make sure people don't sign the 287G and to give other chiefs and sheriffs resources. Some of our folks in Iowa and other states have had victories in pushing back against this. And so if you happen to be connected with law enforcement in your area, let them know about that resource. I think people need support in this moment. But also, if you just want to read their principles, they have a drop down and you can understand why would my local police not want to be involved in this and how can I support them as they do this well. I think that's a good read up.
That's very, very good because we don't have time to get into that today, but I do think that is a question that's going to come up. Why wouldn't we want? Some people are going to ask that. Some people already know why.
Yeah.
And for those of you who don't, just go ahead and visit that website there and drop down, read those principles, and to see why so many of our leadership and law enforcement are saying this is not a good idea for local communities. It's not about the enforcement of federal law. It's about the safety of local communities and enforcing local community and the safety that is involved in keeping a local community intact, safe, and thriving. Right, Jenny?
Yeah, that's
Anything
right. That's right. It's actually safest if they don't participate in the federal, if they keep it separate. And that's because they've built decades of relationships with immigrants of all statuses in their communities. And if they need to hear about something that's really happening, they won't have folks participate in their investigations or report crimes. And in 1 minute, we can undo all that they've built. And that actually keeps us safer if they have their ear to the ground with everyone in their district.
Right. And with all this new funding, why do they need the local guys?
Right.
So
Right.
in any case,
Right.
if that is something that you can remain curious about or you are curious about, feel free to just check out that website and just look at that. That's great information. Always learning here, always wanting to stay curious, also wanting to show up as Christ would in these spaces and love our immigrant neighbors well. So Jenny, thanks for your time this morning, and
Thanks for
hopefully
having
this was
me.
helpful for all. And then remember to sign up for that policy dispatch email. It will just be our newsletter and you'll get linked into our policy dispatch that will have an explainer about all this stuff in the days ahead. So thanks so much, Jenny.
Thanks for having me. I'm praying for you all and walking with you all. I appreciate you.
All right, we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.